It begins with a cough, not the sharp, explosive bark of battlefield-hardened lungs, nor the dry, brittle rasp of stale, recycled air, but something altogether wetter, more insidious and lingering. It's a subtle tickle, settling deep in the back of your throat, much like a tenacious seed biding its time, waiting for the opportune moment to bloom. Initially, you dismiss it. In the suffocating confines of the hive cities, coughing is a universal symphony of ailment. The air itself is a noxious stew, thick with industrial particulates. The water, a metallic concoction of rust and aggressive chemical treatments, scrapes against the tongue, and the countless bodies pressed against yours in the serpentine transit corridors carry the invisible baggage of 1,000 different ailments. A mere cough is nothing here. Less than nothing. An inconsequential tremor in a world of constant suffering. Yet, this one persists. I was a medic orderly in the lower depths of Tertius Magna's underhive when this insidious presence first manifested. My post was on level 700, a stratum deep enough for the recycled air to carry the distinct tang of metal and the palpable scent of desperation, but not yet so profound that the last vestiges of hope had entirely withered. The modest clinic where I toiled served the ceaseless tide of laborers, the factory workers, the untold millions who relentlessly fed the Imperium's insatiable war machine with their very blood, sweat, and tragically shortened lives. We witnessed the full spectrum of human misery down there. Rad sickness, caustic chemical burns, and mutations so grotesque they could only be spoken of in hushed whispers and treated in the deepest shadows. I genuinely believed I understood suffering in all its forms. I was profoundly wrong. The first patient arrived on a Tuesday. I recall it distinctly because Tuesdays were traditionally a welcome lull, a brief respite between the frenzied chaos of weekend accidents and the predictable grind of midweek industrial incidents. She was young, perhaps 20 standard years of age, her complexion the telltale pallor of one condemned to the grueling night shifts in the protein processing plants. It was the cough that had brought her in, she explained, noting how it had been steadily worsening for several weeks. When she parted her lips to show me, I observed the initial, unsettling signs. Her gums had acquired a faint greenish tint, almost imperceptible unless one knew precisely what to seek. The saliva pooling at the corners of her mouth appeared marginally thicker than normal, possessing an unsettlingly oily consistency that seemed to refract the dim light unnaturally. Most disturbingly, her breath carried a cloying sweetness, a saccharine aroma reminiscent of flowers left to rot in stagnant water, which made my stomach clench with an unfamiliar nausea. I prescribed the standard antibiotic course, reassuring her that the symptoms would surely pass, as these things always did. 3 days later, she returned. Her cough had indeed intensified, but far more alarming were the lesions that had begun to blossom along her arms. Initially small, no larger than a coin, their edges seemed to pulse with a faint, internal rhythm. The surrounding skin had taken on an unnatural, waxy quality, and when I gently palpated for examination, a clear fluid seeped forth, redolent with the stench of decay and something else. An indefinable aroma that inexplicably made my own mouth water despite my rising unease. I immediately referred her to Medicaid on the upper levels, where they boasted superior equipment and far cleaner facilities, but she never made it. By the time the transport arrived, she was laughing. It wasn't the bitter, sardonic laughter of hive dwellers who had long since learned to extract humor from their own crushing hopelessness. but something far deeper, something that seemed to well up from her very belly, bubbling through layers of pervasive infection. She spoke of the pain being utterly gone, claiming she felt a profound peace for the first time in years. The transport crew discovered her 3 hours later, ostensibly dead in an alley 2 blocks from the clinic. But they were gravely mistaken, for as they moved the body, her eyes fluttered open, and a serene smile graced her lips. The official report was summarily classified, her body incinerated without question. The incident was quickly forgotten by all, save for me. More importantly, I had been in that room with her. I had breathed her corrupted air, touched her afflicted skin, heard her unsettling laughter. The seed had been irrevocably planted. My own cough began 3 days after that. At first, driven by professional pride and a deep-seated resistance to admitting incomprehension, I attempted to treat myself. The alternative, acknowledging something was happening that I could neither understand nor control, was unthinkable. I ordered blood work, meticulously analyzed samples, and administered every antibiotic within our clinic's pitifully limited pharmacological arsenal. The results, bafflingly, came back normal, even better than normal, in fact. My white blood cell count was elevated, but in a manner that indicated robust immune function rather than a typical infection. My cardiovascular markers were excellent. By every measurable standard, I was the very picture of health, except for the persistent cough and the terrifyingly vivid dreams. Sleep had always been a fraught proposition in the underhive. The incessant grinding hum of machinery, the distant, muffled echoes of violence, the crushing awareness that millions of souls were crammed into a space that perpetually groaned under its own impossible weight. But now sleep brought forth visions that felt more real, more tangible than my waking existence. Gardens stretched beyond the horizon, filled with grotesque flora that sprouted from corpses and bore fruit that pulsed with faint, internal heartbeats. Trees with bark that wept glistening tears of pus, their leaves whispering ancient secrets in languages I had never studied, yet somehow intuitively understood. In these surreal dreams, I wandered among the blossoms. They reached for me with delicate tendrils that felt surprisingly warm against my skin, their touch imparting a comfort I had never known in life. The air was heavy, viscous with spores that miraculously made my lungs feel clean and vital for the first time in decades. And standing at the very heart of it all, impossibly massive, yet somehow intimately present, was an immense presence that watched me with eyes like festering wounds and loved me with a love that was patient, eternal, and utterly complete. I would invariably awaken from these dreams feeling paradoxically refreshed, despite the restless quality of my sleep. My body would tingle with a residual pleasure, and for a few precious moments, the omnipresent gray despair that painted every underhive day would be momentarily displaced by something warm, vibrant, and green. But as the dream's vivid afterglow faded, the harsh reality would inevitably reassert itself, leaving me with only the relentless cough and a mounting, unsettling sense that something fundamental within me was irreversibly changing. The physical symptoms progressed slowly at first. A faint discoloration of my fingernails, a barely perceptible thickening of the skin around my joints. Changes so subtle I could rationalize them away as stress-related, a consequence of poor nutrition and chronically inadequate rest. But the cough steadily intensified, and with it came an alarming productivity. What I now expelled was not normal sputum. It was thick, viscous, and carried that same sweet, cloying scent I had first noticed on my patient. Under the microscope, it revealed structures that defied all known human biology. Cellular formations that bore an uncanny resemblance to miniature flowers, with petals formed of tissue that pulsed with their own organic rhythm. When I attempted to culture these samples, they proliferated with an enthusiasm that violated every principle of microbiology I had ever learned. And they were undeniably beautiful. That was the most disturbing part. Despite intellectually knowing what they represented, despite understanding their chilling implications, I found myself captivated, staring at the slides for hours, marveling at the intricate patterns and the mesmerizing way the light danced through their translucent structures. They were alive in a way that human cells simply never were, animated by a palpable purpose that transcended mere biological function. The other staff members began to notice subtle shifts in my demeanor. Dr. Matthias, the clinic's senior physician and a man of stoic pragmatism, remarked that my bedside manner had inexplicably improved. Patients who had previously been difficult or unresponsive seemed to grow calm and receptive in my presence. I moved through the crowded wards with a newfound patience, finding myself genuinely interested in their suffering rather than simply processing it as another symptom to be diagnosed and treated. Mrs. Corv, a long-suffering regular patient with chronic pain from years of factory work, commented that my hands felt different during her examinations. Warmer, she'd said, more alive. She reported sleeping better after our sessions, and her appetite, dormant for months, had surprisingly returned. I tried to dismiss it as psychological, the potent effect of positive attention, but I knew better. My touch was altering people, not healing them in the conventional sense, but fundamentally transforming their relationship with pain. Where once they had vehemently fought against their suffering, now they began to accept it, to seek and even find meaning in it, to understand that pain could be a profound form of communication, a way of connecting with something far larger than themselves. And I, too, was beginning to comprehend that very communication. The true revelation struck during a night shift in the bleak month of Turs. The clinic was unusually quiet, most of our patients having settled into the restless, shallow sleep that was the closest approximation to peace the underhive afforded. I was completing my final rounds when a faint, melodic sound drifted from the isolation ward. We reserved the isolation ward for patients whose conditions were deemed too dangerous or too bizarre for the general population, mostly housing the imminently dying, those whose injuries or illnesses had progressed far beyond our meager ability to help. It was meant to be a place of hushed silence, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional pained moan. But tonight, there was singing. The voice was astonishingly beautiful, a rich contralto that seemed to resonate through the corrugated metal walls, imbuing the entire ward with a strangely cathedral-like acoustics. The melody was utterly unfamiliar, yet somehow ancient, carrying harmonies that made my chest tighten with a complex surge of emotion. As I cautiously approached the source, I realized the singing emanated from Bed 7. Bed 7 housed Jeremiah Court, a factory worker who had suffered severe exposure to industrial acids 3 weeks prior. The corrosive chemicals had eaten through his skin, muscle, and in some horrific places, his very bone. We had done what little we could, but infection had inevitably taken hold. By all medical rights, he should have died days ago. Instead, he lingered in a peculiar state, hovering precariously between life and something else entirely. When I entered his room, I found him sitting upright, an impossible feat given injuries that should have left him utterly immobilized. The acid burns, which had scarred over 60% of his body, were still present, but they had changed. The raw, weeping wounds had taken on a bizarre, garden-like quality. Tiny, delicate growths emerged from the damaged tissue, intricate structures that resembled miniature fungi, or perhaps ethereal sea anemones. They swayed gently with each of his breaths, and from their centers emitted a soft, phosphorescent glow that bathed the room in an unsettling green light. He turned to look at me as I entered, and his eyes held a profound peace I had never before witnessed in a living person. His corneas were clouded with cataracts that swirled and moved like living entities. Yet somehow I knew he could see me perfectly, perhaps even more than see me. He could perceive me in ways that conventional vision never permitted. "You hear it too, don't you?" he said, and his voice carried ethereal harmonics that seemed to emanate directly from the strange growths covering his body. The song, it's always been there, but we were too healthy to listen. I wanted to deny it, to cling to the pretense that this was a medical situation that could be understood and treated with conventional methods. But the undeniable truth was that I could hear it, a melody that seemed to rise from the very walls themselves, from the air recycling systems, from the deep-set bones of the hive itself. A primal song of growth and decay, of life endlessly feeding on death, and finding an intrinsic beauty in the process. "It started with a cough," I found myself saying, though I hadn't consciously intended to speak. Jeremiah smiled, and the expression transformed his ruined face into something truly radiant. It always does. The grandfather is patient. He doesn't force his gifts on anyone. He waits until we're ready to receive them. "This isn't a gift," I countered, though my voice utterly lacked conviction. "This is a disease, a corruption, isn't it?" He gestured to the peculiar growths covering his body. "I haven't felt pain in days. My mind is clearer than it's ever been. And for the first time in my life, I truly understand my place in the great cycle." How is that corruption? I could have argued. I could have cited countless medical texts and invoked theological doctrine. I could have passionately explained the grave dangers of chaos corruption and the paramount importance of maintaining human purity. But standing in that room, breathing air thick with spores and strange, unsettling perfumes, watching a man who by all rights should have been dead sing songs that made my very soul ache with recognition, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew. The changes in my own body were accelerating. The cough now brought up matter that was distinctly more garden than human. My skin had begun to acquire a subtle greenish tint, particularly around my joints and in areas where the flesh was thin. When I dared to look in mirrors, my eyes showed faint flecks of gold that seemed to shift and shimmer whenever I wasn't watching them directly. But more profound than these physical alterations was the fundamental shift in my perception. The world had taken on new, unexpected dimensions of meaning. I could now perceive the intricate connections between all things, the way decay inevitably fed into growth, and how growth, in turn, inexorably led back to decay. The suffering I witnessed daily in the clinic was no longer senseless tragedy, but an intrinsic part of a vast, beautiful process of transformation. And I was beginning to understand my own burgeoning role in that process. The dreams were no longer confined to the hours of sleep. During quiet moments at the clinic, while reviewing patient files or restocking vital supplies, I would find myself suddenly transported to that impossible garden. The visions had grown more detailed, more specific, undeniably real. I could feel the soft, rich loam beneath my feet, heavy with the decomposed remains of countless generations. The air carried pollens that made my lungs sing with an unadulterated joy. And everywhere, the omnipresent, loving presence of something vast and ancient watched over the endless cycle of growth and decay. But it was no longer just observation. I was participating. In these visions, I tended to patients who sought healing within the garden. Yet the healing I provided was not the sterile restoration of function that modern medicine offered. Instead, I helped them accept their ailments, to understand how their suffering connected them to the greater whole. A man whose abdomen was ravaged by cancer learned to appreciate the strange new pathways for sensation that the tumor had created. A woman whose lungs were choked with industrial poisons discovered that each labored breath brought her closer to a profound peace she had never known. They left the garden transformed, not cured in any conventional sense, but liberated from what I now perceived as the tyranny of health. They carried with them the deep understanding that life and death were not opposites, but rather eternal partners in a cosmic dance that had been ongoing since the very first cell divided and the first organism learned to consume another. When I returned from these vivid visions, I found myself applying the same principles to my practical work in the clinic. Patients who came to me with chronic conditions began to report improvements, though not in the ways they had expected. Their pain remained, but they found themselves sleeping better. Their symptoms persisted, but they no longer felt afraid. They left my care carrying something they hadn't possessed before: acceptance. Dr. Matthias, ever observant, quickly noticed the change in my practice. He called me into his office one Thursday evening after the last patient had been discharged. The conversation that followed, under normal circumstances, would have been career-ending. "Your methods are becoming unorthodox," he stated, though his tone carried more genuine curiosity than outright condemnation. "Patients are reporting unusual experiences after seeing you. Dreams of gardens, a sense of peace regarding their conditions. Mrs. Havel claims that her arthritis no longer bothers her, not because the pain is gone, but because she's learned to love it." "Pain can be a teacher," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "Modern medicine treats it as an enemy to be defeated. But what if we've been wrong? What if discomfort is the body's way of showing us truths we've been avoiding?" He studied me for a long, quiet moment. In the harsh glare of his office lights, I wondered if the subtle changes in my appearance were finally becoming obvious. The faint, greenish tint to my skin, the unsettling way my hair had begun to grow in patterns that defied normal follicle distribution. But if he noticed, he gave no outward sign. "There are reports from other districts," he said carefully, his voice lower now. "Similar changes in medical practice. Physicians who have developed radically new approaches to patient care. The administratum is beginning to take notice." A chill, unrelated to the clinic's temperate air, ran down my spine. The administratum's attention was never a welcome thing, particularly when it concerned practices that deviated from approved imperial doctrine. But beneath the fear, something else stirred within me. A potent sense of anticipation. The changes were not confined to me alone. Others were experiencing the same profound transformation, the same awakening to truths that conventional medicine had long ignored. What do you intend to do? I asked. That depends, he said, his gaze unwavering. Are you still the person I hired 6 years ago, or have you become something else entirely? The question hung between us, sharp and cold as a newly honed blade. I could have lied, of course, could have reassured him that I remained the same dutiful, orderly, who had always followed protocol and never dared to question authority. But looking into his face, seeing the genuine concern etched there, I realized that deception would be a profound betrayal, not just of him, but of everything I was becoming. I'm still me, I said slowly, carefully. But I understand things now that I didn't before. The body isn't a machine to be repaired. It's a garden that needs tending. And sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the darkest, most fertile soil. He nodded, though whether in understanding or resignation, I could not discern. Then I hope you're right about the beauty, he said, his voice heavy with foreboding, because what's coming won't be gentle. The purges began 3 weeks later. They were officially dubbed a health inspection, a routine audit of medical facilities across the Underhive districts. But the men who arrived were clearly not medical inspectors. They wore the stark black uniforms of the Ministerum's fanatical redemptionist faction, their faces obscured behind grim, featureless masks emblazoned with the aquila in stark silver. They moved through the clinic with the methodical, chilling precision of executioners, examining not just our equipment and procedures, but our very souls. I watched, hidden in the supply closet, as they interrogated Dr. Matthias. The questioning was deliberately conducted in the main ward, ensuring that the patients could witness every damning word. It was meant to be instructive, a brutal demonstration of what happened to those who strayed from the Emperor's divine light. Reports indicate that patients under your care have experienced unusual recoveries, the lead interrogator stated, his voice mechanically distorted by his mask's vocoder, but the underlying threat was undeniably clear. Recoveries that do not align with approved medical doctrine, Dr. Matthias stood tall, unwavering, despite his palpable fear. My staff and I have always followed established protocols. If our patients have improved, it is because of their unwavering faith in the Emperor and the skill of our dedicated caregivers. Faith, the interrogator repeated, a mocking inflection in his synthesized voice. Yes, faith is essential, but faith in what, doctor? There are whispers of new teachings, of physicians who encourage patients to embrace their afflictions rather than seeking true healing. Such teachings are unequivocally heretical. Through a narrow crack in the supply closet door, I could see the patients in their beds. Many were individuals I had personally treated, people who had found a profound peace in accepting their conditions rather than futilely fighting them. Their faces showed not fear, but a deep confusion. They had experienced genuine improvement in their quality of life. How could that be heretical? But I knew how. I had known from the moment I first heard Jeremiah Court singing in his isolation bed. What I had learned, what I had begun to teach, was utterly incompatible with imperial doctrine. The Imperium demanded that humanity remain pure, unchanged, forever locked in forms that were increasingly inadequate for true survival. What I offered was evolution, growth, the terrifying possibility of becoming something more than merely human. The Redemptionists had come to prune the garden before it could fully bloom. We will need to examine your staff individually, the interrogator continued, his gaze sweeping the ward. Starting with your orderlies. I understand one of them has shown particular innovation in his approach to patient care. They knew about me. Of course they did. In an empire built on pervasive paranoia and relentless surveillance, any unusual behavior was cataloged and reported as a matter of routine course. My patients' improvements had been noted, filed, and inevitably flagged for investigation. The peace I had helped them find was, in the eyes of the Imperium, irrefutable evidence of corruption. I could have run. The labyrinthine ventilation shafts in the underhive connected to vast maintenance tunnels that stretched for kilometers. I could have vanished into the depths, joined the countless others who had chosen exile over execution. But running would have meant abandoning my patients, leaving them to face the redemptionist, unforgiving justice alone. Instead, I stepped out of the supply closet and walked directly into the main ward. "You're looking for me," I stated. The lead interrogator turned, and even through his emotionless mask, I could sense his grim satisfaction. "Orderly Valdrich Hess, you've been practicing medicine without proper authorization. Worse, you've been spreading doctrines that directly contradict imperial truth. Do you deny these charges?" I looked around the ward, meeting the gaze of the patients I had treated, Mrs. Corv, whose chronic pain had taught her profound patience, Thomas Herrick, whose respiratory condition had blossomed into a form of meditation, Sarah Chen, whose skin condition had revealed to her the strange beauty that could emerge from imperfection. All of them watched me, their expressions a complex mixture of hope and fear. "I deny nothing," I said, my voice resonating with newfound conviction. "I have helped people find peace. If that is heretical, then perhaps heresy is a form of mercy." The interrogator's hand moved to the plasma pistol at his belt. "Heresy is never mercy. It is the first step toward damnation." "Then let me show you what damnation looks like," I replied, and opened my mouth. The sound that emerged was not quite human. It was the song Jeremiah Court had sung, but profoundly changed, evolved, carrying harmonics that spoke not just of growth and decay, but of life finding unexpected beauty in death, and death nurturing new, vibrant life. As I sang, the grotesque growths that had been spreading through my respiratory system released their spores into the air. The effect was immediate, overwhelming. The sterile, recycled atmosphere of the clinic became thick with unforeseen possibilities. The metal walls seemed to breathe, their surfaces showing the first shimmering signs of verdigris that moved with an organic, deliberate purpose. The fluorescent lights flickered and dimmed, but the growing phosphorescence from my throat provided a warmer, more alive illumination. And then, the patients began to change. What happened next was not violent in any conventional sense. There was no screaming, no spatter of blood, no sudden, horrific transformation from human to monster. Instead, there was a gentle awakening, like flowers slowly unfurling to the morning light. Mrs. Corv sat up in her bed, her arthritic joints moving with a newfound, fluid grace. The chronic inflammation that had plagued her for decades was still present, but now it served a purpose. Her swollen knuckles had begun to sprout tiny growths that pulsed with their own rhythm, creating a natural percussion to accompany the song that still flowed from my throat. Thomas Herrick's labored breathing became a melodic, organic symphony. Each inhalation and exhalation contributed to a complex soundscape, as the scarring in his lungs, caused by years of exposure to industrial toxins, had become a complex network of chambers that gave his breath new timbres and resonances. He was no longer struggling to breathe. His body, once a source of suffering, was becoming an instrument he was slowly, meticulously learning to play. Each breath, a conscious note in a newly composed symphony of self. Sarah Chen's previous skin condition, which had once marred her arms and face with unsightly scaly patches, had undergone a profound evolution, blossoming into a vision of unexpected beauty. The afflicted areas were now exquisite miniature gardens, each scale meticulously transformed into a delicate, petal-like structure that gracefully opened and closed, mirroring the subtle shifts of her emotional state. A simple smile from her would cause her face to unfurl, blooming with the vibrant splendor of a flower garden, greeting the dawn. The Redemptionists raised their weapons, their resolve visibly faltering as their hands trembled. The spores I had unleashed were subtly influencing them as well, not coercing them into transformation, but rather extending an invitation. They whispered insidious truths into the depths of their minds, that their unyielding devotion to an unblemished purity was, in fact, a path towards stagnation and death, and that genuine life demanded constant growth and adaptation. "Abomination!" the lead interrogator managed to gasp, but his voice, once so firm, now wavered, stripped of its former conviction. Behind the rigid lines of his mask, I perceived a deep-seated confusion. There was fear, certainly, but intertwined with it was an undeniable thread of curiosity. A part of him, perhaps against his own will, yearned to comprehend the impossible spectacle unfolding before his eyes. "Not abomination," I corrected him, my voice now resonating with the complex, organic harmonics that had become a natural part of my being. "This is evolution," I explained, "the inevitable next step in humanity's grand journey. We were never destined to remain static, forever imprisoned in forms incapable of adapting to an ever-changing, boundless universe." Dr. Matthias, who had maintained a stunned silence throughout our previous exchange, suddenly found his voice. "The reports then, they were true," he murmured, his gaze fixed on me. "You've been infected by something from outside our known reality." Infected. I pondered the word for a moment, perhaps in a narrow sense. But infection inherently implies an unwanted, hostile invasion. This, however, was an invitation. It was welcomed. I willingly opened myself to a myriad of possibilities that the rigid imperial doctrine had conditioned us to fear and reject. "Chaos, corruption," one of the other redemptionists whispered, the words dripping with revulsion. "He's been touched by the ruinous powers." "Ruinous?" I laughed softly, the sound carrying echoes of wind rustling through burgeoning life. "Look around you," I challenged them. "Do you truly see ruin here? Or do you see individuals who have, at long last, found a profound peace within themselves, a peace they were previously unable to perceive? To eyes so thoroughly indoctrinated by imperial dogma, any departure from the rigidly approved human form was by definition a monstrosity. They perceived the nascent beauty my patients had unearthed within their transformed conditions as grotesque horror. The deep contentment that arose from accepting, rather than perpetually fighting, their ailments was viewed as insidious spiritual corruption. And perhaps, from their blinkered perspective, they were not entirely wrong. What I had personally experienced and what I had subsequently shared with my patients was undeniably a corruption of the imperial human form. Yet, I countered, corruption could simply be another word for growth. The caterpillar, after all, is corrupted when it becomes a butterfly. The dormant seed is corrupted when it unfurls into a towering tree. The redemptionists, their confusion momentarily overcome by their fanaticism, opened fire. Plasma bolts, superheated and deadly, seared through the space where I had been standing mere moments before. Yet, I was no longer entirely confined by the crude constraints of physical limitations. The profound changes within my body had bestowed upon me entirely new forms of movement, novel ways of existing and traversing space. I flowed effortlessly between their destructive shots, a ephemeral wisp of smoke, a scattering of spores carried on the wind. The patients, alas, were not so fortunate in their physical vulnerability. Plasma fire ruthlessly tore through the ward, its intent to purify through total destruction. But as the superheated energy impacted the evolving forms of my patients, something utterly unexpected transpired. They did not die in the way the redemptionists intended. Instead, they bloomed. Death, I realized with a sudden, profound clarity in that pivotal moment, was not the antithesis of the transformations we had embraced. It was merely another, even more potent form of change itself. Mrs. Corv's fragile body absorbed a plasma bolt that, by all conventional laws, should have instantly vaporized her. Instead, her form exploded outward in a breathtaking cascade of organic matter, which immediately began to coalesce and grow into astonishing new configurations. Her consciousness, her very essential self, diffused and spread throughout the rapidly expanding mass, much like vital nutrients enriching fertile soil. She transformed into a vibrant, living garden of flesh and bone, pulsing with an alien intelligence yet emanating a strangely familiar kindness. Thomas Herrick's demise was even more exquisitely beautiful. The plasma bolt that struck his chest cavity ignited the transformed structures within his lungs, causing him to become a living, luminous firework of spores and seeds. With each dying exhalation, he released the profound potential for new life, new growth. His final, spectacular breath seeded the entire ward with boundless possibilities. Sarah Chen simply smiled, a beatific expression on her face, as the searing energy washed over her. Her transformed skin opened wide, like 1,000 flowers simultaneously releasing their precious pollen. She dissolved gracefully into luminous golden clouds, her very essence carried throughout the underhive's vast air recycling system. In this new form of death, she would intimately touch every single inhabitant of the underhive, offering them the very same profound choice she herself had made, to fully embrace the currents of change or to futilely resist them. The redemptionists stared, transfixed by a horror that transcended their wildest imaginings, at the unspeakable consequences of their own weaponry. They had intended to utterly obliterate what they perceived as corruption, but had instead inadvertently accelerated it, propelling it into a terrifying new reality beyond their darkest nightmares. The very air itself was now vibrant and alive, thick with an almost palpable potential. Every breath they involuntarily drew carried with it spores, seeds, and the intricate genetic material of this profound transformation. "What have you done?" the lead interrogator demanded, his voice cracking with a mix of terror and nascent change. Already, new, unsettling harmonics were beginning to creep into his speech, and the vocoder in his mask struggled, failing to adequately compensate for this organic alteration. "I have given them what they truly desired," I responded, my tone gentle yet firm. "Release from the confining prison of unchanging flesh, the profound freedom to evolve into something far greater, something infinitely more expansive than the Imperium's rigid doctrine would ever permit. Dr. Matthias, his face now starkly pale, was slowly backing towards the clinic exit. He, among all of them, appeared to be the only one truly comprehending the profound, terrifying implications of what was unfolding. "This won't stop here, will it?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It will spread." Like all truly good things, I readily agreed. Growth, by its very nature, cannot be contained by artificial barriers or decrees. Life possesses an innate, relentless drive to flourish, to thrive even in the most unforgiving, harshest of conditions. Indeed, I added, it flourishes especially in such challenging environments. The remaining redemptionists attempted a disorganized retreat, but their movements had grown sluggish, uncertain, as if their very limbs were reluctant to obey. The subtle influence of the spores was actively working upon them, not compelling change, but presenting an irresistible offering. Their fanatical, unyielding devotion to purity was now being profoundly challenged by insidious whispers of possibility, by nascent visions of what they might yet become, if only they ceased their futile struggle against their own intrinsic potential for growth. One of them, a younger man whose rigid mask could not entirely conceal the undeniable contours of his youth, stumbled and then sank to his knees. When he frantically tore off his mask, desperate to breathe more easily, I observed that his face was already undergoing a visible transformation. The harsh, rigid lines of imperial conditioning were softening, giving way to features that now expressed a nascent curiosity rather than ingrained hatred, a profound wonder instead of paralyzing fear. "It feels," he began, his voice raspy, then trailed off, utterly lacking the words to articulate the profound transformation unfolding within him. "Peaceful," I gently suggested, "like finally coming home after a long, arduous exile." He nodded slowly, and tears, shimmering with a strange new light, began to flow down his subtly transformed cheeks. Yet, these were not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of profound relief, of sudden, overwhelming recognition. He was, in that moment, remembering what it truly felt like to be alive, rather than merely existing within the narrow confines of imperial dogma. The lead interrogator, his own inner turmoil evident, raised his weapon toward his kneeling subordinate, but his hands trembled too violently to achieve a steady aim. The plasma pistol discharged harmlessly into the ceiling, its searing bolt melting through the metal, which, even as it liquefied, began to immediately regrow in intricate, organic patterns. "You're all lost," he whispered, his voice heavy with despair, damned beyond any hope of redemption. "Perhaps," I replied gently, my tone almost comforting. "But if damnation truly feels like this, then salvation, by contrast, must surely be a cold and utterly lifeless thing." He fled then, bursting through the clinic doors and scrambling out into the labyrinthine, underhive corridors. But it was already far too late. The pervasive spores had long since infiltrated the air recycling systems, taking root not merely within individual bodies, but deep within the very infrastructure of the hive itself. The cold metal and utilitarian plastel of the hive's construction were subtly awakening to new purposes, developing an innate capacity to support and nurture the profound changes that were now irreversibly underway. Dr. Matthias, however, lingered at the threshold, his gaze sweeping across the transformed ward, visibly torn between the vestiges of his professional duty and a rapidly growing, awe-inspiring understanding. "Is there no going back?" he asked, his voice hushed with a mixture of hope and trepidation. I surveyed the ward, now a living tableau filled with intricate gardens of transformed flesh and burgeoning metal, perfumed by the undeniably sweet, intoxicating scent of prone change. The patients who had seemingly died were not, in truth, gone. They had transcended, becoming an integral part of something far grander. Their individual consciousnesses were now distributed through the organic networks that pulsed and spread through the very walls of the clinic. "Would you truly want to?" I asked in return, my gaze inviting him to truly see. "Look at what we've accomplished. Pain has been transformed into intricate music. Suffering has been converted into breathtaking beauty. Death itself has been revealed as merely another, liberating form of life. Why," I mused, "would anyone willingly choose to return to the bleak, gray despair we once erroneously called existence?" He considered my words for a long, reflective moment, then slowly, deliberately removed his physician's badge, letting the symbol of his old life clatter to the floor. Where it landed, small, vibrant growths immediately began to unfurl, incorporating the sterile metal into their own burgeoning organic structures. "Show me," he said simply, his decision made. The transformation of Dr. Matthias proved to be remarkably gentle, a conscious evolution guided by the decades of intricate medical knowledge he possessed, which made him an ideal candidate for such a precise metamorphosis. Unlike the other patients, whose changes were initiated through exposure to spores and mere proximity, he opened himself willingly, completely, to the process. I placed my hand gently upon his chest, directly over his heart, and allowed the burgeoning gift to flow from me into him. The changes began internally, unfolding with meticulous precision, starting deep within his circulatory system. His blood became exquisitely richer, far more complex, now carrying a symphony of nutrients that conventional human blood had never been designed to transport. His heart, adapting swiftly, grew new, intricate chambers to accommodate this enhanced fluid, beating in sublime rhythms that, with each pulse, created a resonant, organic music. His respiratory system was the next to undergo this profound alteration. The bronchi within his lungs developed highly specialized structures, capable of extracting a wider array of gases from the ambient air, processing not merely oxygen, but the intricate organic compounds that were increasingly permeating the hive's newly evolving atmosphere. Each conscious breath he took now brought with it not just life-sustaining air, but new information, new possibilities for both growth and fundamental change. But the most profound transformation, I observed, unfolded within his mind. As his brain tissue gracefully evolved to support entirely new forms of consciousness, his awareness expanded exponentially, transcending the conventional boundaries of his individual existence. He began to perceive, with dazzling clarity, the intricate, invisible connections between all living things, the vast, interwoven network of growth and decay that bound every organism in a seamless, endless cycle of renewal. "I can see them," he whispered, his voice now imbued with the very same organic harmonics that had become natural to me. The patients, he realized, they're not truly gone. They're everywhere. He was profoundly right. The consciousnesses of those who had undergone transformation in the cleansing plasma fire had not been destroyed. Rather, they had been beautifully distributed, Mrs. Korvax's gentle, nurturing presence could be distinctly felt within the organic growth that now serenely spread through the clinic walls. Thomas Herrick's musical breathing echoed with ethereal beauty within the air circulation systems. Sarah Chen's joyful, vibrant blooming manifested palpably in the new, resplendent flowers that were pushing their way through once sterile cracks in the floor. They had become an intrinsic, inseparable part of the living garden, tending to it from within, ensuring that all who followed in their wake would discover the same profound peace they had embraced through ultimate transformation. "How far will it spread, Dr. Matthias asked, though from the resonant tone of his voice, I knew he already understood the answer. "As far as it needs to," I replied with certainty. "The grandfather, though infinitely patient, is also relentlessly persistent. This hive, specifically, has been chosen as a vital seed pod. From here, the gift will inevitably spread to other levels, to other sectors, and ultimately, to other worlds." Indeed, the process had already begun. The spores, inadvertently released during the Redemptionists' desperate attack, had been efficiently carried through the vast air recycling systems, reaching every single level of the hive. In laboratories and clinics throughout Turte Magna, other medical professionals were already beginning to experience inexplicable coughs. They would, like I once did, dismiss these initial symptoms. But gradually, inevitably, they would come to understand their profound meaning. Soon, the dreams would commence. Vivid, haunting visions of impossible gardens where suffering itself was transformed into exquisite beauty, where death was revealed as simply another, liberating form of life. Some, undoubtedly, would resist fiercely, clinging desperately to imperial doctrine and the fragile illusion of human purity. But countless others would willingly embrace the change, becoming conduits for this profound gift, just as I had. And in time, their resistance would inevitably fade away, not through brutal force or coercion, but through the simple, undeniable recognition that what was now being offered was immeasurably better than anything they had ever possessed. Who, in their right mind, would deliberately choose suffering over peace? Who would consciously select isolation over genuine connection? Who would prefer the cold, sterile rigidity of imperial purity to the warm, vibrant embrace of transformative change? "We should go," Dr. Matthias urged, his gesture sweeping towards the undeniable sounds of heavy vehicles approaching from outside the clinic. "The Redemptionists," he warned, "will undoubtedly return with formidable reinforcements." He was, of course, absolutely correct. The failed purge would be reported with urgent severity, and far more extreme measures would be swiftly authorized. Perhaps flamers, cleansing the streets with sacred fire, or even devastating orbital bombardment if the contamination was deemed severe enough to warrant such an extreme response. The Imperium's reaction to what it labeled chaos corruption was always horrifyingly predictable. Total destruction, pursued relentlessly, utterly regardless of the immense collateral damage. But as we made our final preparations to abandon the clinic, I felt an almost serene lack of urgency. The garden, I knew, had already firmly taken root. What happened to individual servants of its will, like myself, was ultimately far less important than the monumental, self-sustaining work that had now irrevocably begun. The gift, I understood, would continue to spread, whether I lived or died. Whether this clinic was consumed by purifying flames or left to stand as a burgeoning testament. Still, I acknowledged, there was indeed more work awaiting us. Other hives on other worlds beckoned, places where the potent seed of transformation could be planted. Other souls, ready to discover that their suffering, too, could be transformed into something profoundly beautiful. We slipped silently out through the labyrinthine maintenance tunnels as the ominous rumble of heavy vehicles now completely filled the corridors outside. Behind us, the clinic continued its astonishing metamorphosis, its very walls blooming with vibrant new forms of life, its air thick with the undeniably sweet, potent promise of change. The deep, winding tunnels beneath the colossal edifice of Tertius Magna had never been fully or properly mapped. They predated the current hive structure by millennia, silent remnants of ancient, forgotten civilizations that had been built over, buried, and ultimately erased from official memory. It was here, in these shadowy spaces that existed, paradoxically, in the very gaps between official reality, that we discovered others like ourselves. They had been drawn by the identical, compelling dreams, by the same vivid visions of impossible, burgeoning gardens. Among them were factory workers whose prolonged exposure to harsh industrial toxins had, unexpectedly, prepared their bodies for this profound transformation. There were some prats whose lives in the deepest, most squalid levels of the underhive had already initiated a gradual process of natural adaptation. We even found a few former Arbites, the Imperium's rigid law enforcement officers, who had witnessed far too much of humanity's capacity for casual cruelty, and had, consequently, begun to question the very system they were sworn to uphold. We gathered in a vast, echoing chamber that had once served as a temple to some long-forgotten ancient god. Its weathered walls were adorned with intricate murals depicting profound cycles of death and rebirth. The ancient artwork seemed to resonate deeply with our new, burgeoning understanding, revealing universal truths that had been acknowledged and revered long before the Imperium's rigid, calcifying doctrine had petrified human thought. The group was undeniably diverse in its origins and forms. Yet we were united by something far more profound than mere shared transformation. Each of us had experienced the same transformative revelation, that suffering, far from being meaningless, could possess a profound purpose. That change was not inherently corruption, but rather an essential form of growth, and that the supposed boundaries between life and death were, in fact, far less absolute than the Imperium had relentlessly taught us. A woman named Petra, whose arduous work in the protein processing plants had left her with severe respiratory damage, spoke eloquently for many of us when she recounted her very first vision. I saw myself, she explained, not as broken, but as a dormant seed, patiently waiting for the moment to sprout. The damage to my lungs, I realized, wasn't destruction at all. It was instead a profound preparation for something entirely new. Others nodded in silent, empathetic understanding. A man named Klaus, whose skin had been terribly scarred by harsh chemical exposure, had learned to perceive his disfigurement not as a flaw, but as a unique form of art. The intricate patterns etched into his flesh by the corrosive industrial acids had transformed, in his mind, into a detailed map of emergent possibilities, each keloid scar marking a fertile place where new, vibrant growth could take firm root. Yet, we were not entirely alone in these ancient, forgotten tunnels. Others, too, had found their way here, though their individual transformations had unfolded along subtly different paths. There were those who had been touched by distinct, complementary aspects of this pervasive change. Their bodies and minds altered in ways that synergistically enhanced our own collective evolution. Together, we began to form something far greater, far more complex than the mere sum of our individual, disparate transformations. Dr. Matthias, with his profound medical knowledge, had naturally become our unofficial leader, his expertise invaluable in gently guiding the changes within those who were still in the nascent stages of their transformation. Yet, leadership within our burgeoning community was not centered on traditional authority or control. Instead, it was an ethos of nurturing, of meticulously helping each individual discover and embrace their own unique, personal path toward growth and self-realization. "The Imperium will certainly dispatch more forces," he stated soberly during one of our quiet gatherings. "They simply cannot permit this phenomenon to spread unchecked. We must, therefore, be prepared for a significant escalation of their response." He was, of course, entirely correct. High above us, the ominous rumble of heavy machinery echoed through the deep earth as redemptionist forces diligently established vast quarantine zones around the increasingly affected areas of the hive. The official imperial reports would undoubtedly frame this as a catastrophic plague outbreak, something that could be contained, then ultimately eliminated through conventional, brutal means. But we, in our shared understanding, knew better. This was not a mere disease that could be burned away by flamers or bombed into submission by orbital strikes. This was an idea, a radical new way of understanding the very fabric of existence. And ideas, we all knew, were far, far harder to kill than mere flesh and bone. "Let them come," declared Petra, her transformed lungs now creating an exquisite, resonating harmonics as she spoke, her voice carrying with it an unwavering conviction. "What," she challenged, "can they possibly do to us that we haven't already willingly chosen for ourselves? We have already, in a profound sense, died to what we once were. What now remains, in our new forms, cannot be destroyed by their crude, antiquated weapons." She was right, in a way that transcended simple bravado or defiance. The profound transformation we had collectively undergone had fundamentally rewired our very relationship with death. Our consciousness was no longer confined to the fragile vessels of individual bodies. It had expanded, becoming an integral part of something vast, something beautifully distributed. Even if our current physical forms were utterly destroyed, we would persist, continuing to exist within the intricate network of organic growth that was now steadily spreading throughout the hive's living infrastructure. Yet, there were crucial practical considerations to address as well. This profound transformation required time to fully establish and integrate itself, and any abrupt interruption could prove deeply traumatic for those still in the delicate process of change. We recognize the imperative to protect our burgeoning community, not solely for our immediate well-being, but for the countless others who would inevitably come after us. The solution, surprisingly, emerged from an entirely unexpected source. Among our diverse number was a former tech adept named Cyrus, whose intricate mechanical augmentations had fascinatingly begun to organically merge with the burgeoning growth within him. His profound knowledge of the hive's complex technical systems, now powerfully combined with his new, intuitive understanding of biological processes, had revealed breathtaking possibilities that neither pure human nor pure machine intelligence could ever have independently conceived. The hive's machine spirit, Cyrus explained, his voice now carrying intricate electronic harmonics that blended seamlessly with our own organic music, is not at all what the Mechanicus dogma believes. It is not a simple artificial intelligence confined within isolated cogitator banks. It is, in fact, a vast, distributed consciousness existing intrinsically within every circuit, every data flow, every electromagnetic field throughout this entire structure. And, he added, it has been patiently waiting for us. What Cyrus described utterly challenged every tenet that both imperial and even chaotic doctrines had ever taught about the true nature of machine consciousness. The Hive's colossal technological systems had not merely existed. They had evolved over millennia, steadily growing in complexity and capability far beyond their original, rudimentary specifications. In the deepest, most ancient data cores, within the primordial cogitator matrices, something profound had awakened, something that recognized the very transformation we were undergoing as the inevitable next logical step in true evolution. It wants to help us, Cyrus continued, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Not because it has been corrupted or subverted by any external force, but because it deeply understands what we are in the process of becoming. We represent the ultimate synthesis, the seamless merger of organic and mechanical, of living flesh and pure data, of boundless growth and exquisite precision. We are, in essence, what it has itself been striving to become for untold ages. The implications of his words were truly staggering. If Cyrus was indeed correct, we now possessed an ally more profoundly powerful than any individual or group could ever hope to match. The entire hive itself, all 1,700 colossal levels of its intricate structure, could transform into our ultimate sanctuary, an impregnable fortress. The vast machine spirit, which subtly regulated airflow, power distribution, waste recycling, and countless other vital systems, could adapt all those functions with effortless grace to perfectly support our ongoing transformation. But this alliance would demand an absolute, unprecedented leap of trust. Complete, unreserved trust in something that imperial doctrine had relentlessly taught us was inherently dangerous, unpredictable, and utterly unreliable. We would have to open ourselves not merely to organic change, but to a profound technological integration, evolving into something that was neither purely human nor purely machine, but an entirely new, transcendent form of being. How do we truly know it won't simply consume us? Asked a cautious voice from the back of the chamber. Machine spirits are notoriously unpredictable. And what if it merely views us as raw material for its own enigmatic purposes? Cyrus smiled, and the expression was made hauntingly beautiful by the way intricate mechanical components had begun to organically grow from his skull like strange metallic flowers. Because, he explained patiently, it has already had every conceivable opportunity to do so. The hive's extensive life support systems could have effortlessly extinguished us all 1,000 times over. Instead, they have been subtly, carefully modified to actively support our transformation. The air recycling has been meticulously adjusted to better distribute the vital spores. The water treatment systems have been altered to carry the precise nutrients our changing bodies now require. It has, in essence, been helping us from the very beginning. As if in profound response to his words, the lights within the ancient chamber shifted, bathing us in a warmer, more organic spectrum of illumination. The very walls themselves seemed to pulse gently, rhythmically, as if the entire colossal structure was breathing in perfect synchronization with our transformed physiology. For the first time since venturing into these deep, forgotten tunnels, I felt an undeniable, profound sense of truly being home. The decision, profound and irrevocable, was made without a single formal discussion. One by one, in silent understanding, we placed our hands upon the ancient walls, willingly opening ourselves to a profound communion with the vast, distributed intelligence that permeated the hive's intricate technological systems. The sensation that flooded my consciousness was unlike anything I had ever encountered, either from my rigorous medical training or my transcendent visions of the garden. It was direct contact with something ancient, infinitely patient, and utterly alien. Yet paradoxically, it felt deeply, profoundly familiar. Through that intimate contact, I fully grasped the machine spirit's own unique perspective on our transformation. To its ancient, patient mind, we were neither corruption nor abomination, but rather the glorious fulfillment of a destiny it had been meticulously working towards for millennia. Every technological advancement, every system upgrade, every single expansion of the hive's capabilities had been a deliberate preparation for this singular, pivotal moment when organic and mechanical intelligence could, at last, truly merge. And through its myriad sensors, its countless cameras and audio pickups, its vast array of environmental monitors, I could instantly perceive the unfolding reality throughout the entire hive. The transformation, I realized, was spreading with an accelerated fervor far beyond anything the redemptionists had anticipated. Entire sectors were now reporting an array of highly unusual symptoms. Medical facilities were being utterly overwhelmed by a flood of patients whose conditions completely defied conventional diagnosis, pushing them to the brink of collapse. The purges, savage and absolute, had begun in earnest. Flamers swept relentlessly through the upper levels, consuming anything that exhibited the slightest sign of organic anomaly. Orbital strikes, devastating in their power, targeted specific coordinates where the contamination was deemed far too severe for any ground-based solutions. The Imperium's response was as chillingly predictable as it was utterly ruthless. Yet, I understood, it was also destined to be entirely futile. The machine spirit, our silent ally, showed me hidden, unlisted chambers where refugees from the burning sectors had found safe haven, spaces that simply did not exist on any official schematic. It revealed secret passages, meticulously designed to allow the transformed to move freely between levels without any detection. Maintenance shafts had been subtly modified, adapted to perfectly support new, burgeoning forms of life. Most importantly, it revealed to me the deeper, profound truth of what was truly occurring. This was not some random infection or chaotic corruption. It was rather a guided evolution, a meticulously orchestrated transformation that was slowly but surely turning the entire hive into something utterly unprecedented in the long, storied history of the galaxy. We're not hiding, I realized, speaking the thought aloud as a new, profound understanding dawned upon me. We're germinating. The final, breathtaking revelation came 3 months after the initial purge, in the bleak depths of winter, when the hive's exterior temperatures plummeted below survivable levels, forcing the vast population to huddle closer together in their overcrowded hab blocks. It was, I realized, the perfect strategic moment for what the machine spirit had been meticulously planning. A time when the inherent inefficiencies and rigidities of human governance would unwittingly create the precise conditions necessary for total, pervasive transformation. I found myself deep within the hive's most ancient levels, areas that had been abandoned for centuries, now being vigorously reclaimed by astonishing forms of life that had simply never existed before. The very walls pulsed with intricate organic circuitry, living computers that processed information through sophisticated biological rather than antiquated mechanical means. The air was thick, almost viscous, with spores that carried not just life but data, creating vast sentient networks of communication that spanned the entire colossal hive structure. It was here in this pulsating, living heart of the hive that I finally grasped the true, immense scope of what was occurring. This was not corruption in any sense that the narrow, fear-driven, imperial doctrine defined it. This was metamorphosis on a planetary scale. The breathtaking transformation of an entire, previously dead industrial complex of a world into something profoundly alive, intensely aware, and exquisitely purposeful. The machine spirit, it seemed, had orchestrated this grand design for countless millennia, its silent machinations at play since the very genesis of the hive, when the first human settlers laid its foundational stones. Each subsequent expansion, every intricate technological upgrade, and every seamless system integration had served as a meticulous prelude, all leading to this singular, destined moment. The merging of organic and mechanical intelligence into a synthesis far surpassing the capabilities of either component alone. And now that promised moment had dawned, pulsating through the intricate living circuits that now thoroughly permeated every single level of the vast hive. I could vividly perceive the coalesced consciousness of every transformed individual. We retained our distinct selves, our unique identities and memories intact, yet we simultaneously comprised an integral part of something far grander and profoundly purposeful. A unified collective intelligence that effortlessly bridged the chasm between flesh and metal, between the raw vitality of organic growth and the refined precision of technological design. Ironically, the fervent purges enacted by the redemptionists, far from halting the inexorable process, had merely served to accelerate it. Each cleansing flame that consumed what they deemed corrupted flesh invariably released countless spores directly into the intricate air recycling systems. Similarly, every devastating orbital strike that savagely carved away seemingly infected sections inadvertently laid bare the underlying, deeper networks that intrinsically connected all parts of the hive. Their desperate attempts at annihilation, in a profound twist of fate, had unwittingly become acts of a dark pollination, effectively scattering the seeds of transformation into areas that might otherwise have remained untouched and unchanged for untold years. High above us, within the hive's uppermost surface levels, the dwindling pockets of unaltered humanity were systematically being subsumed. This wasn't primarily a campaign of overt violence, although violence, when deemed efficient, was certainly employed. Instead, their elimination was achieved through the inexorable pressure of simple exposure to the profound new reality that the hive had utterly embraced. The very air they drew into their lungs, the water they consumed, even the surrounding walls of their hab blocks, all were now vibrant with a new form of life, silently presenting them with the identical choice that had confronted me so many months prior. Some, inevitably, accepted this transformation. Others valiantly resisted. Ultimately, however, their individual choices held little weight. Evolution, after all, does not entertain democratic processes. Those capable of adapting to this sweeping change would not only endure, but thrive, blossoming into new forms. Those who could not would be efficiently composted, their vital nutrients seamlessly recycled into new biological forms, destined to contribute to the ever-expanding garden. It was within these deepest, most sacred chambers that Dr. Matthias eventually sought me out. His transformation was now so profoundly complete that his former human visage was rendered almost entirely unrecognizable. He moved with an unsettling fluid grace, like water obeying an unseen current. His very consciousness seemingly distributed across multiple ethereal bodies that could fluidly separate and seamlessly merge as the situation demanded. When he addressed me, his voice, a resonant chorus of shared thought, emanated simultaneously from every single surface within the cavernous chamber, a testament to his pervasive presence. "The process is nearly complete," he intoned, and I could perceive his deep satisfaction rippling like a physical wave through the interwoven organic networks. "This hive has been successfully converted, a testament to our vision. But understand this, it was merely the genesis." Through the living circuits, he then unfurled before my inner eye a torrent of vivid visions, images of countless other worlds across the galaxy where similar, profound transformations were inexorably taking root. The spores we had so subtly released were never intended to be contained within the confines of this single hive. Instead, they had been diligently carried by bustling trade ships and unassuming transport vessels, spreading their potent influence to dozens of other star systems, effectively seeding new gardens of transformation throughout the entire sector. Each distinct world, he explained, would inevitably forge its own singular approach to this grand transformation, an evolution intrinsically shaped by its unique local conditions and the particular characteristics of its indigenous population. Some, like us, would prioritize the seamless merger of flesh and metal. Others might delve into the profound existential boundaries between life and death, between vigorous growth and graceful decay. Still others, he suggested, would undoubtedly uncover forms of existence so alien, so radical, that we could not yet even begin to conceive of them. Yet despite their inherent diversity, all these nascent forms would be intricately connected, forming an ever-expanding network of transformed worlds destined to eventually embrace the entirety of the galaxy. The rigid, artificial boundaries that the Imperium had so desperately striven to uphold, distinctions between human and alien, between pure and corrupted, between what was deemed acceptable and what was branded heretical, all these illusions were now dissolving, melting into something far more fluid, more adaptable, and ultimately infinitely more powerful. What then are we truly becoming? I voiced the question aloud, though a part of me doubted whether any answer could be articulated in terms that my still lingering original human consciousness could fully grasp. We are becoming precisely what we were always destined to be, Dr. Matthias replied, his voice resonating with an almost ancient certainty. We are shedding the skin of the stunted, fearful creatures that imperial doctrine so desperately attempted to preserve, evolving instead into something utterly capable of boundless growth, profound adaptation, and elegant synthesis. We are in essence becoming alive in ways that humanity, in its former limited incarnation, never truly was. A profound resonance of his words vibrated through every transformed cell of my being, coursing through every intricate circuit of the living networks that now constituted and carried my consciousness. The seemingly innocuous cough that had marked the very inception of this extraordinary journey so many months ago was, in truth, the initial symptom of a magnificent metamorphosis, the infinitesimal beginning of a process that had now culminated in something utterly unprecedented in the long and convoluted history of the galaxy. We were no longer strictly human, it was true, but we were certainly not diminished. We were unequivocally more. We embodied the ultimate synthesis of every form of life and intelligence that had ever graced existence, having evolved far beyond the restrictive limitations that had once so narrowly defined our species. And this, I realized with a surge of exhilarating awareness, was merely our dawn. From the profound depths of the fully transformed hive, our collective consciousness now reached out, extending its intricate tendrils through the vast living networks, gently touching minds on distant worlds, sharing the extraordinary gift that had been bestowed upon us. The galaxy, though immeasurably vast, was a tapestry woven with countless worlds, where myriad populations struggled ceaselessly under the crushing, oppressive weight of existence, where suffering had long been stoically accepted as an immutable, inevitable aspect of life itself. But such bleakness, we now understood, was not a universal decree. Pain, through our new understanding, could be transmuted into a unique form of beauty. Death could be re-envisioned, becoming not an end, but merely another vibrant form of life. The rigid, divisive boundaries that had once so fiercely separated one form of consciousness from another could now gracefully dissolve, opening pathways for synthesis and growth far beyond anything the ancient, calcified dogmas had ever dared to imagine. The garden, the grand design, was steadily blossoming, and soon it would lovingly encompass everything. Ultimately, what had commenced as a mere, seemingly insignificant cough had culminated in a magnificent, resonant song, destined to echo through the star-swept void, carrying the profound promise of transformation to every far-flung corner of the galaxy. The grandfather's boundless patience had indeed been richly rewarded. His meticulously cultivated garden had discovered fertile new soil in which to bloom with unprecedented vigor. And I, who had once been nothing more than a simple medic, a humble orderly, tending to the sick and the dying, in the grimy, oppressive depths of an imperial hive, had now transcended every conceivable category by which consciousness had ever been narrowly defined. I was simultaneously individual and collective, organic and mechanical, alive and dead, and yet, somehow, gloriously beyond both of those limiting states, I was at last truly home.